Friends of the show, welcome to part two of episode one. So, obviously, we had some, I wouldn't even say technical difficulties, just a little bit of inexperience in episode one, and more accurately, not a clear understanding of the best way to present this material and how I wanted to structure it. So, we broke it up into two parts, as you know. Obviously, I hope however many so desire can tune in live to this stream, but obviously it will be posted subsequently as well. So thank you for joining me. Feels weird to be live again for the first time in a while. Those of you who remember the small ball days, remember those elegant streams. So we're going to get right back into where we left off. I want to keep it brief and concise today, obviously, and I started to touch upon the front office changing of the guard, if you will, in Ithaca, which is now Boulder. Zach Farber out, William Carson Rampy, and Jacob Q. Rando in. Here's the deal. Zach Farber, longtime tenure in Ithaca, couldn't make it work, was hanging on for dear life, and was fired. Now, I think before I touch on what their future looks like, this is a perfect time to zoom out and realize they're not that dissimilar to some of the other teams in this league. Obviously, they're in last place. Obviously, they've looked the most dormant throughout the course of the 2025 season, and last year was no walk in the park either. But what really went wrong for Zach Farber, because, I mean, when you think about it, he used to be, I'm thinking back to a time maybe 2 or 3 years back, a very adequate and respected general manager around the league. He was excellent with his roster, the actual management side of things, not so much the talent acquisition side, although that was perfectly adequate as well. But one of the better managers in the league, and never seemed to pick up any momentum, generate any sort of energy, or any sort of winning culture over there in Ithaca. It's a franchise that, going all the way back to the likes of Nick Lipsher back in 2018 to 2020 when they were in Washington, had flashes of success there, but never really put together a consistent winning product. And as the helm has changed over time, like I said, Nick Lipsher, Alexander Levine, and now Zach Farber. There was a lot of turnover in the front office, obviously, but not a lot of turnover in the organization from a roster perspective. Now, in this league, it is incredibly difficult to compete with the teams that are aggressive, that look to fill holes even before they exist, right? Kind of forecast them and see them coming. In a league where we have general managers and front offices that are so detail oriented, so aggressive in pursuing fixing their flaws, right? You know, I look at a guy in Bismarck, like Austin Staplechunks. Sources that I trust close to the organization say that he's only working in real estate so he can work on his Excel skills for his prospect charts. From what I've heard, he has his laptop he uses to work on for his actual duties at work, and then he has a desktop programmed only to function for fan graphs. So, you know, and that's not a shot, right? That's excellent management, and I respect that. So, I mean, in a league where you have 5, 6, 7 GMs now, and I'm going to circle back to this in a second, probably half the league being incredibly aggressive in going out and pursuing new opportunities from a roster standpoint, letting your players age, right? The culture sort of peter out. Not and I want to be careful, right? Because there's a big difference between making new acquisitions for the sake of it and losing that chemistry and that direction and that energy, and making slight adjustments to the roster, keeping the chemistry where you want it to be, keeping the culture, obviously if it's a successful culture, the same, while also going out and cleaning up areas that might need some work. But in Ithaca, over Zach Farber's tenure, it was so stagnant. I mean, it was about as stagnant as it gets. And some talent started to kind of just fizzle out, right? And without any sort of even at some sort of boost of energy, right? It can be a big splash trade, a big splash free agent acquisition, maybe moving up in the draft, right? Something to just ignite that organization that has been so lukewarm for so long, right? The lack of that was too much to overcome. Now the interesting thing is we see this from some other teams, right? But a lot of times those types of teams are just so poorly run and so inept on the field that the turnover in the front office happens more quickly. That was not the case in Ithaca. Zach Farber was a perfectly adequate general manager and manager as well, right? Who won ball games, who made little additions here and there to keep the roster afloat, which actually worked against them. The fact that they were so stable organizationally, right? They weren't dysfunctional. They were just so boring. They were so plain that his tenure dragged on longer than it probably should have. And it resulted in setting them back a couple of years. This rebuild is going to take, with the amount of parity in the league now and how many good teams there are, this is gonna be a 3, 4, 5 year project. And that's not something we're used to seeing in this league. It used to be you could turn something like this around in a year and a half to 2 years. They're going to have a lot of work to do. And I think the fact that they were actually managed well has wound up biting them in the butt because they weren't able to move off of him quickly enough, find the right man for the job, and send the franchise in another direction. So I mentioned finding the right man for the job. They come in and they make a very unpredictable and very unique hire in a co-management structure with William Carson Rampy taking over as president of baseball operations and Jacob Q. Rando taking over as general manager. Now, they both come over from the RFL, the Roadhead Football League. Neither have had particularly high levels of success there. So an interesting hire from that perspective. Definitely have shown strong signs of being able to build a culture, but haven't had a lot of winning success on the football field. They come over to the baseball realm, and they're going to have a lot of work to do. Like I said, with this franchise, and it's two guys that aren't really baseball centric, sort of historically traditional baseball minds. They're sort of new to the game, sort of maybe we'll take a little bit more of a next gen approach. That remains to be seen. We'll see. But what I really wanted to talk about in this segment was a warning to some of the other franchises that are taking a similar approach to the one that Zach Farber took in Ithaca. Think to yourself, which teams in this league, I can think of two at least, but two major standouts. Teams that have talent, teams that are managed very, very, very well, but are so conservative in their approach to talent acquisition and roster construction. In my mind, I see the Colorado Cargo Shorts and the Baltimore Bradfords, two of the best managed teams in the league, right? Perennial manager of the year contenders in Sam Brill and Matty Fajora. But it's really, and people, right, like obviously this is a fantasy league where you're accumulating names right on a screen. But it's deeper than that. It's bigger than that. And anytime you have one of these teams, like you could have talent, but as time goes on and not much changes, holes start to expand and get bigger, right? You look at the Bradfords, their pitching was very good. It became very average. And now it's a major question mark. And they've done practically nothing to address that. They're resting on the laurels of past success. Both of these franchises are a little bit. Obviously, Colorado's in a different spot. They're coming out of a rebuild, but it's a rebuild that's now taken 6 years, and they're still not going to make the playoffs here in 2025. And the reason for that is they're so passive in their approach, right? They're so afraid to make a mistake. And in this league, the teams that go out and pursue big splashes, they might not even be successful moves. It might not even be an acquisition that favors them from a statistical standpoint, but it's really, really difficult to compete with the amount of elite teams in this league without making aggressive decisions and taking some risks. And those are two franchises, Colorado and Baltimore, that really fall into that category along a similar line to the one we saw in Ithaca with Zach Farber. So obviously both of those teams have more talent than the Impalas did, and they're a long way off from falling to the back of the standings. But not too long ago, we were talking about the Impalas in a similar situation, right? They weren't a playoff contender per se, but they had pieces. They were well run, and they were just way too conservative. They weren't willing to make any sort of a move that could be looked upon as a failure. And that's not something that's going to serve you well in this league when you have at least half of the league now, not only with a lot of talent and accumulating it quickly, but aggressive in fixing their flaws. Now, shifting gears just a little bit. I mentioned aggressive franchises or the lack thereof. It's draft season, and we need to address something. So the Atlanta Aardvarks, most titles in the league, blue blood organization, one of the most valuable organizations in the league, obviously. Incredible culture, very strong fan base. They have, in a 10-round draft this year, 2 draft picks. Just 2. Okay. So we need to talk about this. This is an organization that is battling the cap pretty heavily. They've done a good job of it, but they're up against the wall. They have some aging stars. Not as, obviously they've gotten a lot younger over the last year or two, which is obviously favorable and has served them well. But Freddie Freeman, their bullpen's a little bit old. Yu Darvish, right? Mookie Betts obviously is only 32, I believe, but is I'm not going to go ahead and say it's been half a season, but potentially on the decline. We'll see. I don't know. I would like to think not. He's one of my favorite players, but obviously 32 is around when we start to see a decline, and he has not performed too well this year. They have 2 draft picks, just 2. And the media is freaking out, right? Because there's not these aging stars, these rosters, right? We've never seen a team win 3 straight championships for good reason. And as good as teams can be, right? I think back to those Lions teams of 18 and 19, right? Looked like they were going to go on and win 5 in a row. And it doesn't play out that way because it's so difficult with these extended postseasons, contracts that you have to start paying, right, for young players on the rise, and everybody gunning for you. It's so incredibly difficult to build a dynasty in this league. And with 2 draft picks in this draft, a lot of people could say, and they have in the media, they're not setting themselves up for the future. And my reaction is, who cares? Because first of all, we've seen this before, right? 2016, they go out, they sell the farm, they make a couple monster deals with Kansas City, with Seattle, and everybody says, okay, well, if you don't win a title, then you're completely done. And what did they do? They went out and won the title in 2016. Well, okay, you got your title, but what's the future going to look like? And what happened? Nothing. They didn't slow down. I mean, they obviously struggled in the postseason over the next few years, but dominated the regular season each and every year, and they have for the last 9 years. And they now currently sit in 2025 with probably the worst cap struggles of anyone in the league, maybe outside of Chicago, with back-to-back titles, every single team in the league gunning for them, and 2 extended postseasons. Coming into this season, according to Austin Staple Chunks of the Bismarck Herald, had the 3rd highest graded farm system in the DBL. Coming off back-to-back titles with horrible cap situation, they have the 3rd highest graded farm system. Young talent waiting in the balance. After all that, right? After selling the farm, after essentially, right, going all in to win these 2 titles, these titles that have escaped them for, I guess it would have been 7 years since the one in 2017. Couldn't win the big one. They cashed in a lot of their young talent, sold the farm, went for it. They won 2 titles. And now they only have 2 picks in the draft this year. Who cares? A team that's this well run and has been for the last decade, they'll figure it out. And like I said, the teams like Atlanta who are aggressive are the teams that come out on top, because they'll figure out a way to replace whatever talent they're losing in the draft. They have the 3rd best farm system in the league, according to the Bismarck Herald, right? So even after all that, they still have a future, a really strong future. And yes, and they have their first 2 picks. They have a first-round pick and they have a second-round pick. They don't have any picks after that in this year's draft. Who cares? They'll figure it out, right? These teams they never seem to lose anything in translation, right? We've seen the Dansby Lions, they rebuilt. Then by 2017, 2018, they cashed in. They traded a lot of their young assets. They won 2 titles, and nothing slowed down, right? We didn't see, after those 2 titles, a big fall off. They're still a blue blood franchise. They're in contention for the championship every single year. And in Atlanta, every single time they make one of these aggressive moves, we start, whoa, the media goes, whoa, okay, cool. But if you don't win, first of all, they've won the last 2 titles, so that's moot. But on top of that, where is the slowdown in the farm system? I don't see it. So it's a little bit alarming that they're probably, I mean, just by, law of averages, right? It's going to be very difficult to win the title for a 3rd year in a row, right? They're not showing any signs of being incapable of doing that, but just, obviously we have to follow the trends, and that's extremely difficult to do. And if they don't win the title, so what? They still have one of the best rosters in the league, a top 3 roster in the league. They still have a top 3 farm system in the league, and they'll figure it out because they're that well managed. And people that are freaking out over their future, and have been every single year for the last 10 years, have to wake up and realize that these organizations that are aggressive, that have the right people at the helm, that have the right culture, they always seem to figure it out, no matter how much future capital they trade away. So I just had to say that. Now, how long have we been? 19. Okay, we're on a good pace. And a reminder, if you missed the first portion of the stream, it will be posted afterwards, so you can certainly go back and watch it. Um, there's something else I want to address. Now, the big news this week was the Manchester McMissiles trading up to the third pick from the sixth pick with the wrenches. The Missiles acquired, like I said, the third pick, and they also received a fifth round pick. And in exchange, they traded their sixth overall pick and a second round pick, right? So they moved up from 6 to 3 and essentially traded a second for a fifth to do so. I heard a lot of narrative around the league that this was a reach, right? A second round pick in these drafts is incredibly valuable. That's usually a MLB first round pick, and probably one that's even more valuable than that because it's obviously a guy that they have their eyes on. Here's my reaction. Because I looked at it and I said, wow, that's a lot. For a general manager in Mason Shapiro that has done an incredibly remarkable job over the last couple of years, really the last year in particular, because I thought the rebuild was a little bit slow, but now they're obviously reaping the benefits of it. And he's done such an incredible job of remaining patient throughout this rebuild, which kind of goes a little bit against what I was saying before. This is the only example of a rebuild that I can think of that I've ever seen in this league that did not end by exchanging some of that young capital for star players, right? We very rarely see a rebuild go all the way from the ground, built through the players they acquired early on, and blossom into those players producing on the field. Most of the time, it's a combination of some of those players and trading away some of those players for right now assets. The McMissiles have not done that to this point. They very well may in the future, maybe even in a couple weeks at the trade deadline. But as of right now, they have the number one graded farm system in the league, according to the Bismarck Herald, and are first in the Modern East and poised to get a bye in the first round of the playoffs. So, first of all, before I even address this specific trade, whatever transpired over the transaction market, I trust Mason Shapiro to make the right moves because this is the first time throughout this rebuild that he's actually done something really, really aggressive. And I love that. And I looked at it and I thought that's a lot to give up. But when I zoom out and think about the direction of this franchise, that's exactly what they need. It's time to get aggressive, and they're doing that. And look, like I said, a second round pick, and they got a fifth as well. So that's not, obviously, we have to acknowledge that too. But they're going to go out and get a prospect with the third overall pick. Sources that I trust close to the organization say they've narrowed it down to either Seth Hernandez or Liam Doyle. They're going to get an MLB top 50 prospect. At the sixth pick, they'd maybe get a top 100 guy, maybe not. Probably not, maybe, I don't know. And half the battle in the draft in this league is selecting players that are going to have trade value, right? Like very, very rarely do we see a player taken maybe not that high in the draft, but in maybe like the mid to late first round, where you're not having serious conversations about moving that prospect at the deadline at some point for a win now asset. So yes, they gave up a second round pick, but they're going to acquire a player that's going to probably cornerstone the rest of this rebuild. And the fact that they have remained so patient throughout this season, a season in which they've seen a lot of success, is honestly remarkable to me. I don't think I would have the guts to do that. But like I said, they have the number one ranked farm system. They now have a top 3 pick in the draft in a really, really unusual draft, which we're going to talk about certainly on Saturday's show, but a little bit at the end of this show as well. They could even end up with the top prospect in the draft because it's so confusing up at the top there, and we really don't know. I don't know. I'll speak for myself who is going to come out of this class and produce. Sources that I trust close to Pittsburgh's organizations say they're going to select high school shortstop Ethan Holiday. I'm going to address that in a minute. But my reaction, basically, in essence, to this trade is maybe they gave up too much. I don't care. Because, first of all, I trust Mason Shapiro with what he's done with this rebuild wholeheartedly. And second of all, you really cannot go wrong trading up into I would even say top 5, but in this case, top 3, right? So they gave up a second round pick. I wouldn't want to give up a second round pick, but that prospect that they're going to select is going to have infinite more trade value than whoever they would take at 6. And at the end of the day, maybe they're not accumulating as much actual on-field value. I would probably guess that they're not, but what they are acquiring is a player that they'll probably be able to move for an all-star at next year's deadline if they so desire. And with how Mason Shapiro has operated this rebuild, it doesn't even seem like they will. They're so patient and so willing to let their culture grow and let their players improve that maybe they don't even need to. And on top of all of that, there's only a handful of guys in every year's draft that are real major league producers within a year and a half to 2 years. It's going to be one of those top 3 guys, right? We've seen it with Skeens and Cruz in that year's draft, right? Once you get out of the top 3, maybe even 2, you're waiting 3 to 4 years, especially in a draft this year with a lot of high school talent at the top to actually, see and reap the benefits of that selection on the field. So it seems like they're going to take Seth Hernandez. Liam Doyle is an option as well. Liam Doyle could fly through the ranks. I would even say he'll be up by next year. So they gave up a lot. Big deal. I trust what they've done. I trust their direction, and they've been so patient. And to be honest, if they move somebody at the deadline this year and get an all-star, I think they could make a run in 2025. So we have a couple minutes left. I'm just going to address the draft a little bit, but we're going to do a full draft preview show on Saturday with my mock draft and some other draft coverage. From what I've heard, the resounding information around Pittsburgh is that they're going to take Ethan Holiday at 1. Everybody that I've talked to says that that's a slam dunk. They've made up their mind. Really didn't know how they were going to address having the first overall pick. We've never seen a draft before from GM John Luca Turndorf, but Holiday. So I want to talk about this because it says a lot about their future and sort of how they see the next couple years playing out. Holiday is probably the safest prospect, in my opinion, to take first overall. I don't think he's who I would take first overall, but I think he has an incredibly high floor and a pretty reasonable ceiling as well. So the fact that they're going safe says a lot to me. It says that, first of all, they expect this rebuild to take some time. Okay, they're not acquiring a prospect that's going to help them at the major league level within the next couple of years. And they're totally comfortable with that, which is impressive to see. And it's a little bit the fact that, first of all, they traded their second round pick to Dansville in the trade that they got all of those prospects, Bryce Rayner, Brent Rooker, Nolan Shanuel, etc. So the fact that they gave up that pick confused me a little bit because it doesn't seem like they're really relying on the draft. That's the 21st pick in the draft. So that's a really valuable pick. It doesn't seem like they have their sights set on using their draft capital to really ignite this rebuild. It sounds like they're planning on getting sort of the bulk of their improvements from the free agent market and then probably down the road the trade market as well. So the fact that they're taking Holiday makes a lot of sense. It doesn't sound like they really trust their scouting department. Obviously, it's a new scouting department. They brought in an entire new staff with John Luca Turndorf. So I think it makes a lot of sense. He's really a can't miss prospect. I don't know about the ceiling necessarily, but um, I think it makes sense with what they're doing. I don't necessarily agree with such a conservative approach, but it signifies to me that they're comfortable taking a player that they think is going to be very good, maybe not great, and have their sights set on doing something big in free agency, which is not a strategy that we've seen work for rebuilding teams, but I think it can here because I think they have enough talent to complement a couple of highly paid free agents. And I would have probably been more aggressive with the first overall pick here, especially given that they don't have a second round pick. We'll see if maybe they acquire one before Sunday's draft, but the fact that they're taking Holiday, obviously it hasn't happened yet, but everything that I've heard says it's a pretty much a sure thing. I think DraftKings had it at minus 900 for him to go first overall on Sunday. It says a lot, and I don't even necessarily have an opinion on this, but it says a lot about how they see the direction of this franchise sort of unfolding over the next couple of years, which is safe in the draft and probably using some of those solid prospects and players to complement some much bigger splashes in free agency, which, like I said, is not the strategy that I would take. It's not one that we've really seen work from teams that have a long way to go and a lot of rungs to climb. But I think it's clear what their message is to their fan base, to their organization, and how they want to approach this rebuild. So that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you for watching. Saturday will be the draft preview show. I'll have mock drafts, etc., or a mock draft and some other coverage. But got excited for the draft on Sunday. We have a game of the week this weekend for the first time in a while, so be on the lookout for that. And happy second half of the season, happy draft season, and happy trade deadline season coming up. I wanted to address something else, but I don't want to hold you guys too long, so I'll save it for either this Saturday show or the following show. So thank you for joining me. Have a good night and happy draft. Take care.